and welcome to this week's Wellness Hack. Today we have writer and soon to be licensed therapist Colette Shade. Colette, can you tell us a little bit about your background and some of your bylines?
Hi. I'm a student, a second year student at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, studying basically psychotherapy. Um, and before that, I was a writer, but I'm also still a writer now. So I've written for places like The Baffler and The New Republic and Jacobin, all sorts of different places about a lot of different topics. But the past year or so, I've really been focused on the intersection between mental health and capitalism, because I think that that's a really undercovered area, both on the left, but also within the kind of mental health professions.
And you told me that you are working on a book as well, right?
I am, yeah. So it's a nonfiction book. So I'm working on the proposal right now, but it's basically about it's about mental health, and it's about the social determinants of mental health, which is basically, why are people so depressed? Why are they so anxious? Why does it seem like everyone is in crisis right now? Um, and a lot of the discourse, the prevailing discourse around this, is related to, oh, well, everyone just has chemical imbalances. That's how they are, and we just have to accept it. And what I'm trying to do is change the narrative. Like, I'm really not interested in I'm really not interested in awareness. Like, you hear a lot of discourse about, oh, mental health awareness. And like, I'm pretty fucking aware about mental health. Like, and I think a lot of other people are too. So I don't feel like that's what we need, is more awareness. We need to figure out and talk about, why are people having these issues, myself included, and what can we do about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely a topic that we are very into, and we've kind of breached a little bit in the past. So I'm really excited to get a little more in depth into it. Um, can you give us a bit of a rundown of what some of your ideas on the social determinants of mental illness are?
So, social determinants of health is a public health term that's used to talk about, if you have an outbreak of something, where all of a sudden there are more people who are getting this diagnosis or issue. There's often a larger cause. It's often not just happening randomly. So an example would be, a lot of black, a lot of black people disproportionately have asthma, but it's not because black people are just genetically predisposed to asthma. It's not because of any inherent difference. It's because polluting power plants and waste disposal facilities and things like that tend to be put in black neighborhoods, and so obviously the people get sick. And so social determinants of health is saying, like, oh, well, these people aren't sick because they're all just getting asthma. It's no, they're getting asthma because they're living next to a waste disposal plant.
Right.
And so for mental health, what that does is and I'm not the first person to do this, but like, I'm expanding purview of the purview of social determinants of health to talk about mental health in addition to physical health. Like, why are people so anxious? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's because, like, they are terrified of losing their job and health insurance. Like, that would make anyone anxious.
Hmm.
And so this isn't to say that, like, people should dump out their meds or anything like that, or that individual treatment is bad, any more than you would tell someone, oh, just, yeah, dump out your inhaler, stop using your inhaler, because this is a socially caused illness. Like, you would still have to, deal with it on an individual level, but anyone who's serious about public health, they have to look, kind of at the bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely the systemic causes for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue that we've kind of talked a little bit about before in previous episodes, that the idea that there are a lot of people that suffer from depression and anxiety that might just be caused by the stresses of their job, and the attempts to completely shoehorn it into something chemical isn't really cutting the full picture.
Yeah, it's all narrowed down to like essentially the society's way of addressing this is saying, well, that's your problem. You have a
Yeah.
chemical
Yeah.
imbalance.
Yep.
You
And-
need to deal with this.
And like diabetes is chemical. But like, we know that diabetes tends to be more prevalent in poor communities because of these social determinants of health, where people can't afford healthy food. So they develop type 2 diabetes, or they're unable to, afford their insulin or go to appointments. And so they develop complications. It's not, and so, yes, technically this is a chemical imbalance, but it's really a lot more than that. It's caused by something.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of something that comes up a lot in the discussions around IQ.
Yeah.
Is the extent to which poverty or living in poverty for an extended period of time can actually lower your IQ.
That's right.
And
it's a great point.
Yeah, something that a lot of that frequently gets left out in the discourse around, oh, well, these people are poor because they're dumb. Well, no, maybe they're dumb because they're poor.
Right. Yeah, I mean, being from the South, like where I grew up, it's hard not to think that. Honestly, it's you can just see certain levels of not just education, but like seemingly awareness in certain areas, and it's pretty sad, really.
Well, cortisol impairs your memory function. And so if you're stressed out all the time, you basically are less likely to remember things.
Oh yeah, that's I've got PTSD, or technically CPTSD, so
Yeah.
every day is a memory battle for me.
Yep.
So next time somebody accuses me of being dumb, I know what to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually probably should start trying to eliminate that word from my vocabulary. I've been trying to do a little bit better about that. Actually, that's one of the questions that we'll get into later. So I'm going to save that for later. Can you kind of just start us out with a sort of a brief explanation of what the social model of disability is and how it contrasts with the medical model?
So the social model of disability was put forth in the 70s and 80s, if I'm correct about that, by disability rights advocates. And it basically says that the medical model, which is the prevailing model, basically says that people with disabilities need to be fixed or they need to be managed so that they can fit into society. But the social model of disability says that what we need to do instead is expand society to allow people with disabilities to live in ways that work for them. So an example of that would be adding image descriptions to like photos that you post online for people who are visually impaired who are using reading software. Or if you're including mental health under that umbrella, doing things like giving people, at work, making it mandatory for bosses to give people time to go to appointments, or mandatory that people get generous sick leave.
Yeah, I can see how the medical model then would be very advantageous for capitalism to kind of come up with excuses for not allowing those kind of benefits or flexibility for workers.
Yeah, exactly. Because it basically says, like, okay, well, either suck it up and fit in, or you're broken. And we're not going to do anything about it. Bye.
So, in terms of the medical model and how it relates to the social model, is is the medical model completely incompatible with the social model, or is it the sort of thing where under the social model you view impairments as not really needing treatment, or is it something more nuanced than that?
I think it's more nuanced than that. And I think it's very individual, because some people might want certain treatments and others don't want treatments. I think it's like I think it's more about I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of debate about this, and this isn't really like my hardcore area of expertise. But from what I understand, there's a lot of debate in various disability communities about this. But no, I don't think that I don't think that the social model and the medical model are necessarily mutually exclusive. I just think it's more about, like, for instance, I know that, like, there's a debate in the deaf community about cochlear implants and whether that will, like, erase this deaf subculture by forcing people, often when they're very young, to integrate into hearing culture, and will kind of prevent them from getting to choose whether they want to participate in this other culture. And so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it just depends on the person and what they want, but that can also be difficult to what an individual wants can also be difficult to kind of pull apart from societal expectations at the same time.
Yeah, I know that in the kind of mental health community, which is one of the ones that I'm more familiar with, just by virtue of my own disabilities, there's often kind of a debate over taking medication, and some people really like it, some people hate it, some people think that it kind of robs them of their personality. I'm, at least for myself, I'm very pro medication, just because the medication that I've been on has been very helpful. But I've had family members who just swore that the medication that they were on just made them feel like a zombie, and
Yeah.
it wasn't the right way to help them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all goes back to kind of individual autonomy. Like, a lot of this stuff is very individual. A lot of these questions are sort of individual and, very context dependent.
So what you're saying is the social model is not all about treating everyone as solely as members of a category and not as individuals, as someone like James Lindsay would say.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to get that dig in there just because of recent events.
Sorry, I don't think I'm actually familiar with who this person is. I'm just looking them up right now.
Were you familiar with the conceptual penis hoax?
I'm not. I can't say I am familiar with that.
Okay. This will be a little sidebar.
Sure.
James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Boghossian submitted a bunch of kind of fake gender studies and other sort of social science articles to non-peer-reviewed journals, that some of which were pay to play, and they were run in the journals. They were all essentially nonsense, but famously, one of them was just a reprint of Mein Kampf, but with Jews replaced by white people.
Okay.
And then they went and touted this as, oh, we've disproved that that critical theory is a real science, and they got a lot of press about it. Like the Atlantic covered them very heavily, and they somehow, I guess Peter Boghossian already had a career, but James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose have been kind of dining out on that for the past couple years, and they've got a book coming out called, I think it's called Cynical Theory, which is their assessment of critical theory and critical legal studies and gender studies and everything in that realm, and why they think that it's all nonsense. But they make a lot of claims that are like patently false
Hmm.
about what actually goes on in those disciplines. And one of the ones that they frequently cite is this idea that in any facets of the critical studies or critical theory kind of realm, everyone is reduced to their membership of a class, and individuality is completely wiped out, which, based on my experience, has not been the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, back to the point, back to the main point at least. Um, can you give us some examples from your experience of how society disables people with mental illness?
Well, I think I was thinking about this, and the number one, the very not the number one, but the very first thing that comes to my mind is Mark Fisher talking about his depression and how that made it very difficult for him to hold down a job.
Mm,
Um, and then, of course, the fact that he couldn't hold down a job in a way that was expected of him made him more depressed. Um, so yeah, I mean, basically, the fact that a lot, in order to maintain a job or career, you have to be able to perform in a certain way at a very high level, I think, for anybody, and increasingly so. Um, and so that can be really difficult if you have episodes of mental illness, and not just depression, but any kind of mental illness, where you're just sort of not able to constantly be on.
hmm
Um, and you need time to rest, or, see your doctors or whatever, or take some time and go to the hospital or whatever. Like, basically, the way that work culture is set up, in particular in the US, but elsewhere as well, like, Fisher was in Britain, it just makes it really, really hard. But I think the thing to also add on to that is that it's hard for everybody. Like, it's really the kind of like basically the demands that are put on people who want to support themselves by most people who want to support themselves by having a career, or even just a job to pay the bills, are just very, I think, unrealistic. Like,
hmm
everyone needs to be able to take time off for themselves, whether they have a mental illness or not. So, I think one of the things I want to emphasize here is that giving people autonomy and freedom in the workplace and elsewhere benefits everyone, regardless of whether or not you have a mental illness or a disability.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of in my day job, which involves dealing with disability benefits. Um, the kind of standard that a lot of like government agencies use for what's considered kind of a reasonable work schedule, um, is one where you're expected to be to like sustain concentration for at least 2 hours at a time, and take no more than one day off a month, which I think a lot of people, even people that don't um, consider themselves to be disabled, even people that um, maintain normal jobs, would find difficult. If you have really any kind of, um, if you have anything that could be remotely distracting. Um, Staying on task for 2 hours at a time all day every day that you're in the in the office or the store or the factory or whatever, can be quite challenging. And I I think it's really, um, it we don't really think about the extent to which, um, our our societal expectations are really so high for everyone.
Yeah, it's pretty unreasonable, I believe. I felt that even before I was really having, like a lot of panic attacks, the stuff that really eventually kind of derailed my quote unquote normal working uh, ability. Um, yeah, it still was, I was able to focus on what I needed to focus on for hours at a time and everything, but it you do that all day long for 5 days a week, and you don't feel like doing anything else, even if you are able to make it through that and concentrate and not be distracted all the time and stuff. Like, you're going to be drained, you're going to be exhausted, you're not going to have any energy to focus on yourself in virtually any other way. So it's on that end as well, not just when you're working, but whenever you're not working, it's taking a toll on you.
Yeah, and generally the dearth of sick leave in this country,
Oh
um,
yeah.
is really kind of a huge problem. And people wonder why we have such such public health issues where people aren't able to catch diagnoses early, and it's because, in large part, in large part because they don't have health insurance. But even if they do, uh, they can't go to the doctor because they don't have sick leave. And just if you have any kind of chronic illness, um, you generally need to go to the doctor, um, more than frequently more than once a month. I see my therapist weekly, and I sometimes go to physical therapy depending on what state my back is in, and I still manage to work generally a 40-hour week. But I'm lucky. I have a job that gives me a lot of flexibility, but um, a lot of people really don't. And I remember previously when I worked at a different place where it was very strict with sick leave, a lot of things really went untreated, and I probably saw my performance suffer quite a bit as well. So in some senses, it wasn't even that good for my employers because wasn't really working at 100%. But
Yeah, I mean, just from like a bottom line perspective, like and I obviously expand my kind of framework for this goes beyond a bottom line perspective, but from just a bottom line perspective, it would be better for employers. I mean, I understand why these sort of overarching ideological considerations that make it not, that kind of put us in the situation we're in, but like it really would be better. It really would be better for not only people who are employed, but also for employers.
Well, that's the case in Europe.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure, right? Like, in
It
Europe,
is.
they get a lot more time off. They
Yep.
work like 4 days a week.
Yep.
They get 2 hours for lunch in some
Yep.
areas.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And I mean, it's not like, yeah, and I think that's why I find it so funny when people are like, "Oh, well, we can't be France because France is socialist," but it's like not. It's just a
It's
more
not.
democratic market economy.
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure this is all very overdetermined, but one thing that seems to be a driving factor is this kind of cultural idea that you have to work hard. You can't let employees get away with things, and everyone has to be working at maximum capacity. And I know that there's been, even in the past few months, there's been a lot of resistance to telework,
Yeah.
because certain employers still have this idea that, well, if people aren't coming into the office, they're going to be lazy. They're going to
Time
be,
theft.
yeah. and um, that's, I mean, I guess I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of data and studies suggesting that people actually tend to do more work when they work from home, and there's
I know
all
I
sorts of
do.
reasons for that. But um, even if you look at it from just the standpoint of, well, if you force all your employees to come in when it's not necessary, and then one of them tests positive for COVID, you've got to go shut your office down for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's incredibly short-sighted.
Right. Yeah, it's just this. It's all done from just an immediate sense of needing that control, that direct control. Uh, yeah, over the bottom line, I suppose. I don't understand
Yeah, over the bottom line. That's absolutely right.
and so like just kind of something that popped up a minute ago when you guys were talking about how we're not able to address things, whether it's mental health or physical issues or whatever. It's like we're trained to almost ignore things that are going on in our bodies and our minds until we absolutely just cannot ignore them anymore, which usually, often becomes a crisis moment or, an injury or something like that. And then we, oh, okay, yeah, I guess we'll deal with this now. Yeah, there's not like a cultural encouragement to, be aware of what's going on with the self. I think that I wish we could move closer to a culture like that.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I also wish that.
So, insofar as providing accommodations or structuring society to accommodate people with disabilities, um, other than time off or giving allowing for breaks and things like that, what are other ways that society can accommodate people with mental illness?
Well, a lot of different ways. I mean, part of it is basically listening to what people say they need. Um, if someone needs, if someone, um, like I mentioned earlier, if somebody needs like image captions, things like that. Providing transcription for recorded things so that people can read, they don't have to listen. If there's like a speech or a podcast that's recorded, things like that can be helpful. But again, it's just sort of about like, this sounds a little trite, but just listening to what people say they need. If it
Mm,
seems like a lot of people are saying, hey, I need, why aren't you putting captions on your video? Just maybe you should put captions on your video. But I think the other thing too is being a little bit more, I guess, respectful of others and just sort of um, letting people do what they need to do without being judgmental and rushing to, correct or judge them as long as, they're not hurting themselves or hurting anybody else.
yeah, and that's definitely an issue these days where it seems like everyone has become some form of uh, expert in, well, everyone seems to think that they're an expert in mental health now and wants to kind of like judge people's actions and say, oh, well, this person's a narcissist, so screw them.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you're not even if you have the credentials to be able to diagnose someone, you really can't do it over Twitter.
Yeah.
And even if you could, even if you are able to diagnose someone, and it's, you still shouldn't like use those terms to just dismiss people's value.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wonder how. Well, right now, the Mary Trump book is, I think, on its third week at the number one of the New York Times bestseller list, and I always kind of wonder how useful that kind of thing is to society. And I mean, I'm sure she has a relationship with him. She's his niece and everything, but um, she's not, and she is a credentialed psychologist. But it's at the same time, she's not his therapist, and I would think it's just kind of weird when you have people, putting all these, even when it's someone as toxic and awful as Donald Trump. When you have people kind of putting out these diagnoses for his behavior, and it becomes such a big part of the public discourse.
I think my issue is that it just seems a little beside the point to me. Like I can't really feign outrage, and in fact, that book actually seems sort of intriguing. That's like, I've pretty much avoided all of the like inside Donald Trump books. I just don't want to go anywhere near inside Donald Trump. But like, I just, that I will admit that that's the one book that I was like, oh, that piques my curiosity. But I think the trouble with all this discourse is that it's sort of beside the point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, I've called Trump a narcissist, but like, I don't know. I just think that it's I just think that that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that he has terrible policies and he's endangering everybody.
Mm.
If I may be a contrarian a little bit, I definitely agree, Matt, that it is weird, and I'm not taking a stance on, like whether it's morally or ethically okay. I would probably err on the side of it not really being too okay for her to like. Does she actually diagnose him in the book, or does she kind of just dance around symptoms type thing? I don't know, but.
I haven't read the book. I've only seen interviews with her, and
yeah, me too.
She gives kind of like loose diagnoses in interviews, but I mean, there's a lot of reliance on her authority as a psychologist.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I less than that. I mean, I would say that her being a psychologist kind of somewhat supports what I value about what she has to say, which is just her familial experience,
Mm-hmm.
and like. I think culturally, like maybe not us leftists, that have kind of just been analyzing, the policy and everything. But there's a lot of people that like, I think don't fully understand Trump, and I think humanizing him in the way that what the excerpts I've seen and what I've seen her say, in the way that he would not want to be humanized,
Mm-hmm.
is probably culturally a good thing. And that's just kind of a feeling that I have about it. It's not based on really anything, but yeah, that's just kind of how I see it. Is that it's good to get it out there. Like when you hear about or read about how his father treated him and his siblings and stuff, it's like exactly what you would expect to have created that kind of guy. And it kind of just.
Mm-hmm.
For me anyway, things clicked into place, and I just only see him as like a traumatized little boy that's just lashing out at 74 years old in the White House, and it kind of, I don't know, it informs me in a way that I feel is helpful to me.
Kind of forces you to continue working on kind of a basis of empathy, even in the worst situations.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it is sad if you're able to really think about the way that his father treated him and stuff. Apparently, is it's pretty atrocious. And if, the sad thing is, children are treated like that all the time. It's just that this is what happens when they're just hyper privileged and
Mm-hmm.
supported throughout their failings.
Yeah, I mean, like before I studied psychotherapy, I studied literature, and a lot of being a good reader and also a lot of being a good psychotherapist is using your imagination to put yourself in other people's shoes and trying to figure out why they might do what they do.
So to that end, if we're going to try and have empathy for even Donald Trump and accommodate all sorts of disabilities, are there limits to what we can accommodate, and are there conflicts between various disabilities?
So I'm going to go back to just what I always say is it's contextual.
Hmm.
everything is contextual. Like I'm increasingly hesitant to make big, broad statements about you should always do this, you should always do that. Just for anything, and not only professionally, but just in, politically, or in my personal life. Everything is in relation to something else. So basically, like, I want to talk here about a class that I took on behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the things we talked about were the ways that it can be really helpful, but also it can be used, especially by parents of younger children, to try to change things about their children that are kind of fine. So, an example of this would be like a lot of parents with autistic children want their children to stop stimming. So, they don't like if their children flap their hands because they're happy or concentrating. They don't like it because the parents, are like, oh well, other kids don't do this, so I don't want my kid to do it either. But that kind of doesn't. I mean, it's complicated because that really doesn't harm anybody, as long as you're
Hmm.
not like hurting yourself, as long as you're not hitting your hand on a wall, or hurting yourself or hurting others. You know, there's nothing, there's really, every behavior serves a purpose. And if this is a behavior that helps you, process things or blow off steam, or, just feels good like that, there's nothing wrong with that. And so if it's somebody if it's a parent, say, who's like, oh, my kid's banging their head against the wall, then maybe like you can work with the kid to try to figure out something that is not going to physically hurt them, you know?
Hmm.
But, it's about working with, I mean, I think like, yeah, I mean, it's just sort of about, I think the limits of accommodation, like with a lot of things, are basically like, if it's, if accommodation basically means like letting you hurt other people or hurt yourself.
Like, how much does the social model for disability kind of map onto just the concept of intersectionality in general?
It does a lot, I think, in that it basically, I do want to know what exactly do you mean by that?
As in, is there a way to, like, if we were trying to explain to someone who's never heard of the social model of disability, as compared to the medical model, is there a way to kind of use intersectionality as a kind of a framework to say it's like this, so we would do X and Y?
Yeah, you mean in terms of like relating it to racism, or like
And yeah,
relating it to ableism, to
gender and
racism, and yeah, sexism and things like that. Yeah,
mhm.
I mean, like, yeah, I mean, you would pretty much say that, like, discriminating against somebody, who, people with disabilities or mental illnesses. It's just sort of like, you could say, yeah, it's the same as discriminating against someone else for their gender, or, sexuality or race, or any of these other categories. But another thing that you could do, especially for people who maybe aren't versed in the language of intersectionality, is to just sort of talk about respect, and just talk about how the social model of disability is about respecting people.
And that actually kind of leads me into another question. One of the charges that's often laid against intersectionality by some people on the left, at least, is that it causes division amongst the working class and creates internal conflicts that prevent sort of solidarity. Um, is the kind of is there a way to kind of get around the conflicts that would be caused by essentially requesting workers to accommodate other workers' disabilities? Like, for example, in workplaces, a worker may require more time off than another worker due to an impairment, and this might cause another worker to take on more work and might cause some resentment. So how do we
Right.
kind of mitigate that and make sure that
Well,
everyone is, supporting one another?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I think there's, when you look at intersectionality, there are really two faces of it. One is this sort of iteration of intersectionality where it's used as a way to advocate for everybody. So you would say, like, what's good for people of color is good for white people, and what's good for what's feminist policy is actually good for everybody. And similarly, you would say, like, policies that actually really help people with disabilities, and people who are mentally ill, like that, those are good for everybody, actually. So, like, if somebody, getting autonomy in the workplace and getting a lot of time off, like, if you're getting enough time off, you probably aren't going to insanely resent your coworker who's taking time off for another reason. But then the other side of that, though, is that it can kind of be used cynically, to say, oh, well, like, you can only have protections in the workplace if you fit this into this very narrow category, which, by the way, is constantly being chipped away at, but whatever. And this is sort of the, I don't know, I guess it's a sort of like kind of like mainstream liberal approach, where it's like, oh, well, if we just expand legal protections for this one category, that's good. And I mean, yeah, it's better than nothing, but it's like, that I think does actually, that it's not really sufficient. And it can also have some sort of problems, in the sense that people who aren't in that category but still have needs are really resentful of
Hmm.
people who are in that category, when they shouldn't be, but whatever.
Yeah, and that I'd kind of plan on talking about this a little bit later, but that kind of makes me think of some of the criticisms that have been levied at the ADA from the left,
Yeah.
that it has been used as a way to kind of well, number one, expand the workforce so that the labor market just favors employers more, but also as a way to kind of force people into these narrow requirements in order to get any kind of benefits,
Yeah.
and say, well, if you want any kind of um, accommodation at work, or if you want something that's going to just make your job easier, you need to prove that you're disabled, and you need to fit these. If you don't fit these
Which,
narrow
by the
requirements,
way,
then
is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive. I mean,
yeah.
if you actually want to, you can't just stroll in with a note from your doctor. I mean, it's like, you really have to, you know, pay lawyers and all of this other crap. I mean, this is not really my area of expertise, but I've had, clients who have done that, and I have, friends who have done that, and it just really is. It just seems really like, I mean, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, yeah. It's in a previous job, I worked on fair housing issues, and one of the big ones was ADA accommodations in public housing, and boy, it was not easy for people to get over that hump. And then there were also a lot of ways that um, people were people kind of abused it cynically to argue that, oh well, this this person this person needs X, Y, and Z, and are I mean, one of the kind of outs for the Fair Housing Act is if there's something that's just structurally untenable, then you can basically argue that it's too much of a burden and say, well, okay, I'm going to kick this Section 8 tenant out of the apartment, and people would respond to kind of very reasonable requests by saying, "Oh, well, this is something that's structurally untenable, and now not only am I not going to give you what you're asking for, but I'm going to kick you out of the apartment and go and find someone else who's a more profitable tenant."
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of weird situations in my day job. But yeah, it's and then generally applying for benefits is really kind of a nightmare for a lot of people.
Yes.
It's so some of the things are just so specific. Some things have gotten a little bit better. They've gotten a little more um a little more holistic in terms of the way that they evaluate whether someone is disabled for the purposes of whatever body of law it is, but there's still a lot of things that are extremely draconian, and kind of the downside is lawyers and lawmakers tend to like bright line rules where, if you're on one side of this, you're disabled, and if you're on the other side of this, you're not disabled. And there's a lot of things that are based on age where they're like, well, if you can do this kind of work and you're 49, then you can work. But when you turn 50, well, you can't work. And the difference between a 49-year-old and a 50-year-old is often not any kind of difference at all. And two people with the exact same impairments and the exact same needs for accommodation, who are 1 year apart, one of them might receive their accommodations, or they might be receiving their benefits, and the other person's just kind of shut out and said, well, maybe in a year you can apply. But for a lot of people, they don't even have that year. Like, a year's a really long time if you're out of a job.
No kidding.
Or if you're out of housing. That a lot of people don't survive the year. But hopefully we'll do like a full episode. I'm hoping we're going to do a full episode on disability benefits at some point, and
Me too.
I can do it in such a way that I don't make my boss angry by saying the wrong things. One of the main things in the social model is kind of generating solidarity among people with disabilities so that they're better able to resist the oppression of capitalism and an ableist society. What ways? What are some kind of good baseline rules for generating solidarity with disabled comrades?
The same basic rules you would use for generating solidarity with anybody, which is just, I know I keep reiterating it, but just to sort of be respectful to people and listen to them.
Mm.
And, treat them the way you treat anybody,
Is there a way that we can kind of get around the isolation that sometimes disability causes? Like, a lot of people with disabilities are not necessarily able to make it to DSA meetings, right, or make it to protests.
That's a good point. Well, yeah, I mean, so basically, just understand that there are lots of ways to be involved. Not everyone can go to a protest. Not everyone can go to a meeting. There are all different ways that people can be involved politically. They can, maybe they can phone bank. Maybe they can, organize things. I'm not an organizer, so again, this is not really my area of expertise. I haven't attended a DSA meeting in probably a year at least, but yeah, that's not really my area of expertise, but the sort of broad thing to emphasize, I think, is just that everyone is good at different things. Everyone can participate in different ways, and everyone has something to offer.
All right. So coming back to probably the most contentious topic that we touched on a little bit earlier. How important is language in the social model? And do you have any opinions on there's been a lot of discourse surrounding ableist language, specifically regarding mental impairments, probably most specifically regarding cognitive impairments.
Yeah.
And earlier, I used the term dumb, which I know is becoming a very contentious term among some sectors of the left, and I've been trying to kind of eliminate that sort of language from my vocabulary, but and not necessarily succeeding all the time. But how important is that to kind of making people more able to interact with society?
Well, I mean, like anything, it it can be helpful and it can also be obfuscating. So, on the one hand, using or avoiding particular language can be really empowering for some people, and but on the other hand, who gets to decide which language is okay? I mean, no one should be, I know that there are some people on the left and elsewhere who kind of deliberately use offensive language. And that's bad. Like, that's not good. That should go without saying that that's bad. But I think where you get into thornier territory is where, where people like, where one group of people says like, oh, well, you can't use a certain word, like you use the word dumb, and then another group of people says, oh, well, that's fine. So who decide? I don't know. I mean, I don't really have a good answer here. In terms of like words that you can't say. I mean, there are certain words none of us should be saying, but beyond those words, I really don't know. I think I don't have a good answer here. I think again, it's like, I always keep going back to this, but I think it's all about being respectful and listening to what people have to say to you. But I think one thing I want to talk about that's sort of on that topic is that there is a lot of hotly debated, there are a lot of hot debates within various disability and mental health communities related to different types of language. So there's a debate about person-first language. So the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, which is a really cool group that is, everyone there is autistic, and they was started by a guy named Ari Neiman, who's really interesting, who's actually getting a degree in public health at Harvard, focused on disability. He's autistic, and he started this group because in reaction to these groups like Autism Speaks that weren't really run by actual autistic people. So on their website, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Group talks about how they use the term autistic person instead of person-first language, because people in the group see their diagnosis as a positive part of themselves and as a central part of themselves. But then you have other people who don't like that because they don't want to be defined by their diagnosis. And so I don't think that there's a right answer to any of this any more than there's a right answer about language that is used regarding race or gender. Again, it's just don't use words that will make people mad just to make them mad and trigger people. I mean,
as just kind of a rule of thumb, it's kind of like nobody wants to feel ostracized or otherized, right? So
right.
Just if we're just mindful of, not using language that might do that, and if we do accidentally use language that does that, then just being accountable and learning from that is the best we can do.
Yeah. And I will say that, on the other end of on the other side, um, you know, sometimes language can be used as a kind of cudgel and a gatekeeping device, or it can cause confusion because one group of people says, hey, we use this term, and the other says, hey, we use that term, and they're sort of talking past each other. They disagree on what something should be called. And I think the solution to that, again, is just being respectful and polite, and you know but also and also just not attacking. If someone you don't think is using the right language, as long as they're not being an asshole to you deliberately, you know not coming at them and jumping to the conclusion that they're against you necessarily.
Yeah, I think something that the kind of interaction that needs to happen more is one in which if someone says something that another person in the conversation is uncomfortable with, they say, "Hey, I'm uncomfortable with that language," and the other person says, "Okay, well, I respect you, so I'm not going to use it." And it's not like um, not someone immediately saying, "Hey, you used the verboten word, so you're a fascist,"
Right.
and
Yeah.
not someone responding back with, "Oh, you're trying to take away my free speech." It's like because it seems like those are the two common reactions in a lot of situations.
And I think they're both pretty bad reactions.
Right.
Are there any ways that the social model can kind of be, speaking of cudgels and gatekeeping devices, is there a way that the social model can be twisted around against people with disabilities?
Can you say more about that?
Well, like I said previously with the ADA, one of the big criticisms was that it's kind of been used to that although it's done a lot of great things and it's provided a lot of accommodations for people with disabilities, it's also been used as a way to kind of section off people with disabilities,
Oh, sure.
um, and uh, kind of create more more of a comprehensive form of means testing, and since there's much more distinct criteria for people with disabilities being entered into the workplace, there's kind of a justification. Some of the justifications that have popped up in, at least in like government agencies that are doling out benefits, are kind of along the lines of, well, it's required that an office or a workplace give you this accommodation, so you can work now, and we're going to take your benefits away.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's a problem. But again, it's like I keep going back to this idea that a big problem is that basically everyone needs more benefits. Everyone needs
Hmm.
there needs to be um, across the board an expansion of democracy and a redistribution of power and resources just for everybody. And I think that would be, I mean, first of all, I think that would be less of a dire issue if that were the case. But I also think that you know, if there was a more democratic system, then people would be able to advocate, if they do need disability pay, or, they feel that they can't work, in a way that they can't really advocate now because of the way power is distributed.
Yeah, I mean that kind of reminds me a lot of the a lot of the cases that I deal with in my day job aren't necessarily even people looking to get on the the well, I guess everyone who gets benefits is technically on the rolls, but I hate using that term, but that's what everyone at my office uses. But people aren't necessarily looking for payments. A lot of the time, they're applying for. They're trying to prove that they're quote unquote disabled so that they can get Medicare. And um, something that we always kind of joke about at work is that if there was a single payer system, a lot of us would probably be out of a job. I'd be fine with that. I mean, there would still be plenty of things to there would still be plenty of things that would be going on in the disability community. I don't know that certainly wouldn't solve things right away, but there would be a lot of people that would be really well served just by access to healthcare. And they probably the most common thing that I deal with is especially from a mental health standpoint, are people who have a diagnosis and they to some extent know what they're dealing with, but because they don't have any health insurance, they either can't go to therapy or they can't get their medicine. And we look at one of the really awful things about the way a lot of disability benefit systems are set up is there's usually some kind of out where if it can be shown that the person is stable and able to work when they're receiving treatment, then they're not eligible for those benefits. And a lot of the time, people maybe they're able to go to work when they're receiving treatment, but they can't afford treatment, and it's kind of like this self-enforcing cycle where they're out of a job because they can't afford treatment, and they're not going to get treatment because they don't have a job and they don't have and they apply to Medicaid, but they don't get on Medicaid, so they don't have any way to access treatment, and then whatever government agency they've applied to for benefits says, well, yeah, we would give you benefits, but you're not really disabled because if you were going to your therapist, you'd be fine.
Right. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tightrope I had to walk for several years because I, despite getting onto disability, Social Security disability, I still needed to work. And so I basically just had to familiarize myself with the laws, with how much you can work, how much you can make, all of that, just because I understood that this is what would happen, that if I lost disability benefits because I was working, then I would no longer be able to work because I wouldn't have medical care. So yeah, it's a real catch-22 that's not it's not cool.
Yeah.
It's not cool.
The other area where I see that a lot is people with diabetes, and in a lot of cases, diabetes is extremely easily treatable, especially if it's type 2 diabetes. And I mean, in many cases, it's not, but I've had countless cases where the person that I'm working with really, if they just had like a ready supply of metformin, or if they had a ready supply of insulin, they'd more or less be fine. And they're not able to work because they're having like severe complications from not getting that treatment. And then the government agency or whichever program they're applying to says, well, yeah, like, sure, you've got you've had to have like your foot amputated, but if you were just taking metformin, then none of that would have happened, and we're not going to help you out. It's yeah. And they're like, well, I can't afford metformin, so what am I supposed to do? We're happy to if there's information you want to get out there, we're happy to let you talk as long as you want to.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure. Well, right now I'm working on a book proposal with my agent, Eric Hain, and basically it's a kind of anti-self-help book that is about how to create a better world where we're all a little healthier. So, I guess look for information on that. I mean, a book proposal is really like a slog, so might be some time, but be on the lookout, I suppose.
So you're sort of like the anti-Jordan Peterson.
That's actually exactly right. I'm the anti Jordan Peterson. But I still think that if you can make your bed, you should make your bed, because it will improve your life.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing inherently wrong with cleaning your room, but just as a
Yeah.
foundation for well-being, it maybe isn't.
It's not the place. Yeah, it's not it's not going to fix everything, is my point.
While we're at that, I read your most recent article in the Baffler about gratitude-based therapy,
Yeah.
and that's something that I've kind of seen here and there, but I guess I hadn't really thought all that much about it. But that really is that a really that kind of seems like a very sneaky way to kind of individualize problems and kind of put the onus on people, on individuals, to say, well, the reason you're not happy is because you're not grateful for what's around you, and you should be happy with what you're getting and not focus on that instead of focus on making things better for yourself or for
Yeah,
everyone.
I think that's right. It's basically a way of telling people to settle, and I mean, that's not to say that people shouldn't be grateful for what they have. They should, but it's just that, like, that shouldn't be the basis of, any kind of mental health practice.
Mm,
It just, a lot of times, like, at least in certain spheres of the, therapy world, there will be focus on, like, creating gratitude lists and things like that. And it's just like, okay, well, what if your life really sucks? Like, you should
mm.
be pissed off about that. And yeah, like, part of being, part of humanity is finding joy in the most dire of circumstances, but that shouldn't preclude figuring out a way to fight for a better life for yourself or for others.
Absolutely. Yeah, if it just as I've mentioned on our show a couple of times, one fact that I really kind of almost obsess over is the fact that we haven't made a whole lot of progress with understanding a lot of mental illnesses and how the brain works, compared to other aspects, other parts of the body. Um, and so, like, we just are still on this early, we're in the early stages of starting to understand these things. And so we're never, the only way that we're going to progress and understand better and more and improve treatments and improve well-being is to constantly push for better.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. We should be, if you're getting help and it's working on some level for you, you should be grateful for that. But it's no reason to, like, rest on your laurels and be apathetic and just trust that we should advocate for ourselves is really where I come from. Just be your own advocate.
I agree. I agree. And I guess a lot of what I was saying in that article was that, like, I feel like a lot of this gratitude talk from certain types of mental health professionals is really, and this word is overused, but it's really gaslighting. Like, I had an internship in a jail last year for my first year, my clinical internship, because I was told that that often we train on underserved populations, which basically means that, like, you try out what you're, they send all of the people with no experience to jails and places like that. The same is true, I know, for like like dentistry, I think, and other types of sort of helping professions. A lot of times people are taught on people who are incarcerated,
Hmm.
which is its own problem, obviously.
Yeah,
But regardless of that, there would be this focus on gratitude. Everyone in jail should be grateful for what they have, and it's like, dude, you're in jail. Like, of course it sucks. Like, it just felt like so offensive to be
Mm.
telling people to just be happy, be grateful.
Yeah, I remember when I was in law school. Obviously, one of the I also went to University of Maryland, and they have a really big clinical focus there, which on the one hand is really good. and it was great getting all the firsthand experience. And it's great that they do provide services to the community. But at the same time, I think there were a lot of people who came into the law school looking for help with certain things, and they get like a 22-year-old second year law student who doesn't know anything, and it doesn't necessarily inspire a lot of confidence.
Yeah, no kidding.
And a lot of and a lot of the time with, especially with the stuff that I was working on, a lot of the time things would come down to just how much money you have to throw at the issue. Do you have all the money for the appropriate filings and everything? Because like the school wouldn't cover like court fees and things like that. And
Wow.
there were a lot of people who were basically like, well, I'm broke, so what do you want me to do?
So you mean a lot of clients or a lot of law students?
A lot of clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, it was kind of like, you could give them, you'd say, well, here's how you can, I can go and represent you in court and help you out with this, but even if you get a free lawyer, you still need like $50 to file a complaint, and then there's all sorts of other fees that are, even if you're just a plaintiff, all these other fees that are roped into just having access to the court system that people just don't have a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, like this is a little bit of different topic, but a lot of I want to have a private practice, and a lot of private practice therapists don't take any health insurance, and frankly, I probably won't either. And the reason why is because it is basically the way things are set up. You really can't support yourself with the reimbursement rates. And so, there's a lot of sort of outrage about like, well, why don't therapists take Medicaid? Why don't therapists take insurance? But really the issue is that like, that is an issue, but it's like everybody, in the system we're living in, it's like everybody has to support themselves. And so a lot of people, what I kind of want to do, what a lot of therapists will do is they'll see they'll see a certain amount of clients for a sliding fee, a sliding scale. So that way they're not only seeing people who can pay the full price, but like, what would be much better is if, practitioners didn't have to do this weird thing. Like they could just see whoever they wanted to see and be reimbursed fairly. And, people could afford to see, people could afford to see them. They could get reimbursed fairly. But the way things are set up, with the way insurance works in this country, it's just really a disaster.
Yeah, it seems like in a lot of cases it really would be best if we didn't just have a single payer system, but something more akin to the NHS, where
I think that's right.
Yeah, where we just have people on payroll, and it's kind of amazing how much resistance there is to, especially having like social workers and therapists on the government payroll. Like there's something that I'm very involved in just because of my mother was had bipolar disorder with fairly severe psychosis, and she received a lot of care from the mobile crisis unit, and and thankfully we had the privilege to get to have them sent to us instead of the police, which I really do think was very much a privilege of being white and living in the suburbs.
Sure.
Because at least like Baltimore County is willing to have a mobile crisis staff that is actually on the county payroll, whereas the city doesn't. And I know there is a Baltimore crisis response, and I'm always telling people, hey, donate to them. They're really underfunded, and if you want someone to show up to a wellness check that isn't the police, they're the ones who do it, and if
Yeah.
if they don't have people and staff, then the police are going to show up.
Right.
But that's like one of the huge kind of inequities where there's all this like that's something that, in my opinion, should really just be the state funded, and every jurisdiction in the state should have like a robust team of social workers and therapists that deal
Yeah.
with those situations.
Oh yeah. I mean, like it's a public good.
Well, I think that's a good note to end it on. It's been a real pleasure, Colette.
Yeah. Thanks for
Can you
having me on.
thanks for joining us. And can you remind everyone where we can find you online?
You can find me online, mostly on Twitter at Ms. Shade, MSSHADE.
We'll keep an eye out for your book, and
Awesome.
Definitely.
I really appreciate all the information that you've given us today.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colette.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me.